Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Good evening, and thank you for attending this very important public forum on school funding. I want to also thank Penn State University Lehigh Valley for the use of their facility this evening. I am Roberta Marcus, President and Master School Board Director of the Parkland School District. I will be serving as the moderator for this evening, and it is a pleasure to be here with you and to look forward to a great discussion. Our purpose here is to inform, enlighten, and encourage engagement. Our topic is school funding and state funding policies. It is sponsored by Education Voters PA and the Campaign for Fair Education Funding. Panelists will have about 5 minutes to make opening comments or make a slide presentation. We will have a timer, and that will be Sandy. Sandy?
Yeah.
There you are.
Back there. I need someone else to time.
Okay, we'll be having a substitute timer. And that substitute timer, Otto's going to be our substitute timer. Raise your hand, Otto, please. Thank you very much. He will have a yellow card letting the panelists know when they're at 4 minutes. To keep them on schedule, we hope Otto will be very kind in showing them okay, pay attention. We're very kind and keep to our schedule. They will be talking about funding issues and tell their local story. When we have time, after we have the remarks, we will open it up for questions from the audience, and 2 gentlemen will be helping us this evening with collecting questions. That will be Tom, raising your hand, and Mike, also raising his hand. And I will do my best when we collect the questions to collate them to a topic so that we can have the panelists have an opportunity to answer which questions you have given us. So we will start with Dr. Roy, who's our first panelist, but before I do that, I will introduce each one of them. Dr. Joe Roy is Superintendent of the Bethlehem Area School District. Ms. Stacy, I gotta put my glasses on. Gober, CFO, Bethlehem Area School District. Mr. Rich Snizak, Superintendent, Parkland School District. Mr. Russ Giordano, School Board Director, Salisbury Township School District. Dr. Russ Mayo, Superintendent, Allentown School District. And Ms. Susan Gabreski, Executive Director, Education Voters of Pennsylvania. Dr. Roy?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Am I close enough?
No.
Can you get closer to the mic?
Can't hear.
Push the button down.
Turn it on.
Yeah.
Step 1. The green light becomes brighter when you turn it on.
Yes.
So, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I want to take us through some quick slides to kind of set the stage for the issue of fair funding and hit some topics that are specific to our district, but probably touch many districts around the fair funding formula, try to illustrate it that hopefully we can then have discussion and questions about later. So quick background on our district. We're a large district, one of the largest districts in the state. The piece I want to highlight here is kind of the incongruence between the being the 133rd most wealthy school district in the state out of 500. So we're not a poor school district, yet 50% of our students are classified as economically disadvantaged. So there's a little disconnect there in how we measure district wealth that you'll see show up in some of the subsequent slides. We talk a lot in our district about our roadmap to educational excellence. The whole purpose of fair funding is so that, and budgets, is so that we can fund our goals. And this is the framework with core learning, the core subject matter, stretch learning. How do we stretch students in all areas, be it academic or inside the classroom or outside? How do we engage students? Because we know they learn more when they're engaged. And then have personal skill development. Sometimes I think we don't talk enough about that in public schools. We want to grow and graduate good citizens as well. One of our challenges as a large suburban urban district is we have a tremendous range of students from pretty well off, upper middle class students to students that are coming from serious poverty circumstances. And I think the fair funding issue for us gets to our ability to deliver the educational supports for the kids coming from poverty, the kids that are most at need. And as we face the budget struggles over the last few years, the real challenge has been the after-school tutoring, during-the-day tutoring, financing busing after schools, and so kids can stay for tutoring, and then getting them home. A lot of if we believe that all students can learn, and the standards shouldn't change, the academic standards shouldn't change, but time should be the variable. Some students need more time than others. Then we have to be able to provide the variable of time, and a lot of times that's after school or extended into the summer. And those things are very difficult to do in the current funding situation for school districts. I'd like to show this slide to show that as a district, we've been very conservative in the growth of our expenditure over the last couple of years. So what this shows is, if you look at the yellow piece there, VSD operations, if I take out the two things below, the pension, PSERS, and what we pay to charter schools, the percentage change in our budget from last year to the current school year, the expenditure increase is 0.25%. So 0.25% growth, basically flat. So we've done a very good job of controlling our expenditures with the things that we can control. But as I often say, that's like I can say, hey, I can pay my family bills, no problem, as long as I don't count my mortgage. I have to pay the mortgage. And we have to pay PSERS and we have to pay charter schools. And in the current funding situation, those increased stresses on us have caused us to cut programs, cut staffing over the last few years, and also raise taxes. So even where we've had a 0.25% increase on our piece of what we call our piece of the budget, we still had a nearly 5% tax increase last year. The current budget we're working on, our preliminary, is still similarly only a 1.7%. By the time we're done with the budget, will be less than that percentage increase in our operations. I already got the sign, so I got to move really quickly. A big piece of the funding challenge is the cost of school choice. This slide simply shows that if all the students in charter schools in the Bethlehem Area School District returned to us, and we hired 67 teachers, it would cost us $5.8 million. We'd save $15 million. So whether you're for or against school choice, there's a cost to school choice that's an extra burden on the taxpayers. And I think how charters are funded needs to be addressed in any fair funding formula. There used to be a charter subsidy to school districts. That yellow line would represent it. It went to zero. You see the blue line dropping to zero. If we still receive that charter subsidy, we would be up at the upper end there, over $4 million a year, to help the state, helping to reimburse us for the cost of our district. It's been zero. For us over the last few years, that's a $15 million deficit, potential revenue that we haven't received that we would have. Bottom graphs show, again, issues around school funding, fair funding. Our poverty has gone up, percent of reduced lunches increasing as our Market Valley aid ratio has dipped downward, so there's a disconnect. Here, with our economically disadvantaged students, we can show that when we looked at districts that have a similar makeup for aid ratio, that are similarly wealthy, do not have nearly the percentage of students in poverty we have. So again, disconnects in how the needs of students and the funding that happens. And we can show the same thing with limited English proficiency, districts that have same English students, ELL students, similar percentage, generally have a much higher aid ratio than we do. So the funding as it currently exists, there's disconnects between the needs of the students, as represented by economically disadvantaged and ELL, and how at least our district's ability to pay is represented through the aid ratio.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. No, now I have to remember to push the button. Good evening, everyone. As the CFO for Bethlehem Area School District, I'm going to share some of the financial demographics. Dr. Roy shared some of our student demographics and our other similarities. I will look at the financial Our school district is made up of 5 municipalities, including the city of Bethlehem, and we span 2 counties, which makes some of our challenges a little bit interesting from a financial standpoint because of trying to balance tax millage rates and so on amongst 2 counties. For the current year, we have an operating budget. Yes, in the public type of that. And I don't have any big.
Oh,
I don't have any. We have an operating budget for the current school year of $236 million and a proposal that is going to be just over $240 million expected for the upcoming school year. That is about 80% of our budget directed for direct student instruction as well as related student services. And of that, another misconception is often we spend an awful lot of money on extracurriculars and activities, which really only accounts for 1% of our operating budget. Pensions, however, are accounting for 10% of our overall budget, and charter school spending represents 8.6% of our budget. So in order to manage those costs, as Dr. Roy indicated, we have done as much as we can in terms of maximizing all of the efficiencies within our operations. We have looked at reducing programs over the years. We've reduced staff over the years in order to maintain that very tight margin on our own internal operations in the areas that we can control. If you look at our comparative tax rates, it's represented there. We are fortunate to enjoy a very stable economy within our school district, and we have had small but steady real estate growth in our tax base. So that has allowed us to maintain a moderate tax rate, which is in line with the statewide average, but well below the regional average in the area. We have, in this room, if you follow anything around education funding, and even if you don't follow it, you've probably heard about our pension issues within the Commonwealth and the rise of the cost of that with all of our school budgets. And for Bethlehem, that represents nearly $25 million of expense in our operating budget. Charter schools has been an ongoing steady growth and pinch in terms of our expenditures, rising at a trend of about 16% growth per year. An interesting number, if you look at it, is we currently are projecting about 1,800 students that are going to attend charter schools for the upcoming year, which is actually larger than 1/3 of the Pennsylvania public schools, and that is just our charter school population. So it gives you some reference point as to why this is such a large expenditure within our operational budget. In fact, it represents almost 10% of our total tax millage is committed to funding charter schools. We are currently sending our students to 17 different charter schools, and the amount that we spend in charter school tuition, another comparable fact, is that our charter school tuition alone of $21 million per year is more than the total budget of 20% of Pennsylvania schools. To understand that impact a little bit more closely in the Lehigh Valley, if you combine just the Allentown and Bethlehem charter school tuition costs together, we would those dollars are larger than 58% of the Pennsylvania public schools that we are spending on charter schools. So we are funding essentially dual public school systems within each of our school districts, and in aggregate for the Lehigh Valley, quite a material investment in an alternative school system. If you look at it a slightly different way, we spend currently $224 million to educate 13.5 thousand students. And if you offset the revenue that we have available in our budget without an additional tax increase, we have a surplus of $12.2 million. Our charter school cost for the upcoming year is $21 million. That leaves us a deficit of $8.7 million that we still have to fund, that is directly attributable to the amount of money that we are funding for charter tuition. Just the charter and the PCERS costs together have increased $31 million in expenditures over the 10-year period that you see there, which explains why we are all struggling to the extent that we are to find ways to pay for just 2 areas within our operating budget, not to talk about all of the programs that we need to offer in order for students to succeed. When you look at instructional subsidy, Over the last few years, there has been press that the investment in basic education funding has increased, and you can see in the black bar that it would appear that way. However, in doing so, the combination of other subsidies that previously were individual line items in the state budget have been combined in order to make that comment that basic ed funding has increased, when in reality it's basically been flat. Basic education funding in Bethlehem accounts for only 11.75% of our operating revenue. So the remainder of that burden is going to fall onto our local taxpayers at 71% local funding for our schools. And you can see that graphically with that gap, where the yellow line being your state funding has remained flat. All of the growth in both the mandated expenditures that I've shared previously, as well as our own internal operations for student programs and learning, have been borne by the local community, which is where we really need to be focusing our efforts on an amended funding formula for basic education subsidies that is equitable and adequate to appropriately educate our students, as well as to address a different charter school funding formula that will take that burden off of the local taxpayer.
Thank you. We'll move on now to Mr. Rich Sizak from the Parkland School District, please.
Thank you, Roberta, and good evening, everyone. The 72 square miles of the Parkland School District encompass 3 townships with a total population of approximately 50,000 people. The school district consists of 8 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 1 high school, and serves approximately 9,200 students and has approximately 1,355 employees. The community holds high expectations for students and programs and strongly supports educational endeavors. In the Parkland School District, among our challenges and concerns remains the uncertainty tied to our Commonwealth funding in the areas of basic ed funding, special ed funding, cyber charter school tuition costs, and rising pension obligations. The Commonwealth's share of school funding should be made available to school districts in predictable, regularly scheduled payments and allocated based on a fair, equitable, and adequate funding formula. While Governor Wolf seems eager to contribute more to public education, his ideas are receiving mixed reviews from the legislature. To that end, in Parkland, we have no other choice but to budget conservatively when considering Commonwealth funding, thus placing a larger burden on our local taxpayers to fund our comprehensive educational program. Under the governor's proposed budget plan, Parkland was predicted to receive an additional $502,051 in basic ed funding. In the category of special education funding, Parkland is forecast to receive an additional $233,519. Additionally, Parkland's estimated cyber charter school savings based upon 2013-14 was forecast at $437,182. This totals approximately $1.17 million. Our current budget deficit is approximately $1.19 million. I cannot stress strong enough the need for the Commonwealth to increase contributions to basic ed funding and special ed funding. Without any substantial increase in funding, this would be the 7th consecutive year special education has received no significant increase in funding. And in reality, that's a decrease in funding, as more and more funding burden is passed on to the local taxpayer. In 2015-16, Parkland's projected special education expenditures are approximately $20.2 million. The Commonwealth's projected allocation of funds for special education funding for Parkland are approximately $3.3 million. And the federal allocation of funds for special education in Parkland is projected at approximately $1.8 million. The total special education funding from the state and feds projected for Parkland in 2015-16 totals approximately $5.1 million of a $20.2 million projected expenditure. This means that the difference, $15.1 million, or approximately 75% of the cost of our special education program, is funded by the local taxpayer. In contrast, in 2009-10, the Parkland taxpayers funded 54% of the special education costs in the district. This further illustrates my point. that no increase or a minimal increase is really a decrease in funding. This type of financial stress on a school district may compromise the district's ability to provide a comprehensive educational program that is an inclusive program that meets the needs of all learners, including our least able students. For this reason, the Commonwealth must be committed to ensuring sufficient resources for student education. Furthermore, public schools need the flexibility to utilize federal and state funds in the most cost-efficient manner based upon student needs within each school and each school district. Locally elected school officials are in the best position to make tax decisions based upon the needs within their communities, particularly when state and federal legislators do not meet the goals of funding education in an equitable, adequate, predictable, and efficient manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Russ Giordano, School Board Director, Salisbury Township School District. Russ?
Good evening, everyone. I'll give you some insight into Salisbury, which tonight feels like I'm in the land of the giants. Let's see, is that working now? No? A little closer? Okay, there we go. All right. So I want to give you a little bit about Salisbury, and then I hope to have a little time to give you a little perspective as a very long-serving school board member. So the first thing I thought we would show you is a little bit of key district data. Where is Salisbury? How big is it? We're a pretty small district. We have 4 schools and an administration building. We have about 1,600 students. The township itself is the sole municipality within our district. We are not Salisbury Area School District, as sometimes is said. We're Salisbury Township School District. However, in our 1,600 students, our poverty level has raised to 30%. And if you were in Salisbury 10, 15 years ago, that would not be. We are supporting transition to ELO students from 26 different languages, and our school budget this year is $32 million. You can see on the map that we are surrounded by a number of the districts that are sitting here tonight. And the odd shape of Salisbury, little fun fact, we are the only non-contiguous township in the state because Emmaus managed to annex what Allentown didn't manage to annex over the years. And so that's why we look the way we do. Some key financial data. Our tax base is highly residential. Even in those commercial numbers, I believe in those commercial numbers are apartment complexes, the few apartment complexes we have. So we have very little industry and not a lot of commercial property. And our largest employer, which also happens to be the largest employer in the Lehigh Valley, being Lehigh Valley Hospital, resides in Salisbury and yet pays minimal taxes, as in next to none. If they were taxed the way the rest of us were taxed, Salisbury School District would be realizing $4.6 million a year. And we have an agreement with them in lieu of taxes. They've been good enough to renew that agreement. So I think we receive about $130,000 from them a year for the properties that are not taxed, and certain parts of them are taxed. But, you know, $130,000, $4.6 million. You do the math. Our revenues are, again, local. In that 18.3%, $5.9 million from the state. That includes the PSERS reimbursement and the Social Security reimbursement. So when I did a little math this afternoon, what we're really getting from the state is $3.5 million, not 5.9, because we as a board cannot add to curriculum or fund field trips or buy band instruments on the money that the state is reimbursing us for what we've already paid for PSERS or Social Security. And the federal support of our school district is just nothing short of a disgrace, as you can see, and has been for years. Last year, we increased our taxes 3.4%. We tried to stay around $100 a year for the average taxpayer in Salisbury Township. There are some years where we just have to do more because we are determined as a board and as a community to provide the best education for our 1,600 students that we can. and we are doing some wonderful things in our township. And how are we able to do them? Because our taxpayers are extremely supportive. We are number 3 in Lehigh County for the millage rate this year. That is new. We have been rising. We were, I think when I first got on the board, we were number 6. We are usually number 4, number 5 in millage. Last year we were number 3. And this year we think we have a nice surprise for our taxpayers. And if some other districts that will remain nameless would actually ever have a tax increase, maybe we would go back to number 4. There was one thing I did want to mention, which I don't think, let's see where that went. Well, I'll just say it, it's here somewhere. But our aid ratio, we are considered wealthy by the state. And we are the 3rd wealthiest school district in the Lehigh Valley, according to PDE calculations. So the 3 S's, according to the state, have a lot of money. Saucon, Southern, and Salisbury. And we are number 3. And if you drive to different parts of Salisbury Township, you would be surprised that is the calculation the state has come up with. If you drive to other parts of Salisbury Township, you would not be surprised in the least about that. But that's another thing, that we have a very wide socioeconomic range in our township, and a lot more diversity than we had, and a lot more needy students than we had, and so that obviously costs a certain amount of support. I've only got a couple more. Since 2009, you can see some of the things that we've had to cut. And we've tried to do it around the edges. We've tried not to do it with things that are direct instruction to students. And we've been trying to bring some of those things back. But we've also done a lot of wonderful things in our township. Once again, because of the support of the taxpayers. We have a renovated, expanded, practically new high school. We just were awarded the 2nd in the nation by the National School Boards Association and another organization for our digital learning and our technology integration for schools, districts of our size. That costs money. We are going to have full-day kindergarten this year. It only took me 3 years to make that happen. And we're doing other things too in our curriculum, all because that's where we decided to put the money. Transportation, it costs us $500,000 a year just for charters, private, and parochial. If you remember the map I showed you, we go from Emmaus to Fountain Hill. That's a lot of mileage. So you can go 10 miles on any border of Salisbury Township, 10 miles we have to bus to. So we are busing to 49 different schools, and we're pretty small. Charter tuition, we've heard a lot about that. We have 52 in charter schools right now. The business manager's budgeting for 59 because that's what we had the year before. We're hoping to have fewer than 52, but you never know, so you have to budget for it. So there's, almost $1 million with transportation, probably over $1 million for 59 kids to have the so-called choice. And Peasers about that. And special ed, you've heard enough about that. And I guess the last thing I want to say, if Mrs. Marcus will indulge me, is that this is my 16th year on the school board. It has been an honor and a privilege, and I really loved every minute of it. But as much as it's a labor of love, over the years, it's become increasingly frustrating that we have to spend as much time as we do cutting corners, robbing Peter to pay Paul, not discussing program advancement and curriculum improvement, and trying to figure out how are we going to pay for band uniforms, and begging our booster clubs to do things that the school district should be doing for kids, field trips and all of that. So it is frustrating as a school board member to have to spend so much time counting your pennies. That's not why most of us got on the school board. Our fiduciary responsibilities are important, we get that, but we're having to spend too much time on this because Harrisburg is just not doing what they need to do to support public education.
Thank you, Russ. And we'll move on now to Dr. Russ Mayo, Superintendent of the Allentown School District. Russ?
Thank you, Mr. Berger, and thank you for having me tonight to represent the urban and Allentown perspective also, along with Bethlehem. The last few years, the impact of state funding and the recent recession has been pretty dramatic on Allentown. Allentown's the third largest urban school district in the Commonwealth with 17,000 students and about 87% minority. The big number here for us is a 50% mobility rate. So it's very difficult when kids are moving in and out of the district or around the district, of course, to have enough stability to have some pretty serious impact as we'd like to with our test scores. I want to make three basic statements that I will support very briefly, one of which is that currently Allentown School District is one of the nation's and the Commonwealth's most economically disadvantaged school district, and I know that sounds like some kind of dramatic, glittering generality, but there was a study released last July of 2014, and by the American Center for Progress, which is the website you're welcome to check and find the study is www.americanprogress.org. The study was entitled America's Most Financially Disadvantaged School District and How They Got That Way, and financially disadvantaged school districts were considered to be those serving student populations with much greater than average need, poverty, mental health, medical, social, emotional needs, and much less average funding. The reference to averages is not just within the Commonwealth, but across the nation in that particular study. And one of the quotes from the study is that Pennsylvania reveals a pattern of savage inequities rivaled only by that of Illinois. And not surprisingly, those savage inequities are exemplified by the conditions in 3 state schools they pointed out in Pennsylvania: Philadelphia, Reading, and Allentown. And if you look at, there should be a handout, I think, that's just come around. If you look at B1, the chart on B1, which looks like this, there's a landscape on your sheet. That is a chart from that study, figure B1, which on the left vertical axis, I can never get my X's and Y's straight on axes, but the vertical axis is the percent enrolled in disadvantaged students in districts. So you can see Illinois, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania are high. Notice that Pennsylvania is west of the line of what is getting into progressive. It's on the regressive side. So you have Pennsylvania fitting into this study Commonwealth-wise with its funding, I won't even say formula, I'll just say with its funding period, that it actually is regressive and has a regressive impact. And they've pointed that out, of course, saying notably more regressive states such as Illinois, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire have the largest shares of children attending fiscally disadvantaged districts. They also have a table in there that's kind of interesting. It surprised me personally. It lists the school districts in particular by categories. One type of category they call savage inequity, and there's not a time to go into what all these mean, but you'll see them defined in the study. And it lists a relative poverty ratio, which is the ratio of disadvantaged children to the amount of funding. Believe it or not, Philadelphia and Reading fall behind Allentown on that ratio. We actually have a higher disproportionate ratio between disadvantaged students and the funding that comes to us. And then the relative revenue that comes to us, we have the lowest number of the 3. They're the only 3 districts in the study mentioned out of the Commonwealth in the study as disadvantaged. The importance of this disadvantage is attracting personnel. Stability is a major problem, as I mentioned, not only with our kids, but when you don't have sufficient funding, that becomes a major issue. The map on the back of the handout that you have there is shown with a quote from the study that says, quite possibly the nation's most fiscally disadvantaged local public school districts of significant size lie to the north and west of Philadelphia in the districts of Reading and Allentown. Second statement is that the current conditions of education funding for the districts in the Commonwealth is directly related, of course, to the recent Great Recession, coupled with the lack of attention to funding under the past administration in particular. There's a number of tangible ways I could cover that impact us so negatively. 20% reduction in our staff, several years of freezes for our employees. The impact of charters, as was mentioned earlier, we pay $30 million this year, most likely, at least that's the trajectory we're on, to charter schools. There's intangibles which I think are equally as important, and that is that the children of poverty, of course, come to us with, each hour hearing maybe a vocabulary of 616 words versus in a professional home 2,153 words. So you're already at disadvantage when they come to school. Marketing's another problem, of course, when people are hearing about furloughs and so on, even applying to the district. If I don't know whether I'll be there by the end of the year, why should I apply? So you have a spiraling down effect when you have low funding. The last statement I would make is that, of course, the governor's current proposed budget pivots us from this doctrine of laissez-faire to a doctrine of indispensable investment in public education funding, as I call it. There's about $7 million that Allentown would gain in this if it remained intact, which we understand that's quite a statement. But we would be able to avoid a maximum tax increase. We've cut $80 million worth in the last 4 years. We won't get back to where we were very quickly, but at least it's going in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mayo. And our final panelist for this evening is Ms. Susan Kabreski, Executive Director of the Education Voters of PA. Susan?
Thank you for having me. Okay, thank you for having me. So we have rural districts, urban districts, wealthy districts, and poor districts, and across Pennsylvania, all of these districts have been cutting programs. And as they talked about, the thing that can hardly be measured is the loss of time when you're talking about how to plan for cuts, how to plan for inadequacy, instead of really planning for what our children need. Pennsylvania is one of 3 states in the nation that doesn't have a funding formula. We have the widest gap between wealthy and poor districts. And per pupil spending is in poor districts is 33% less than in Pennsylvania's wealthy district, which is the biggest gap in the nation. So the broad issue here, the broad problem for all districts, and you can hear the different ways it manifests, but we don't have a comprehensive approach to funding schools in Pennsylvania. And one of the things that means is that it gets pushed down to local taxpayers, and that creates a lot of frustration. It creates a lot of cognitive dissonance when you've got 2 communities that are near each other, and they have different tax rates and different quality of school districts, because it's hard for people to look and say, well, this district has these issues, and this district has this tax base, this district has a hospital. But Pennsylvania really does have a constitutional, economic, and moral imperative to educate our children. I think one of the things that people talk about how complex the problem is, and it's true, but I think one of the things that is easy to get your head around is there are 3 basic principles of adequately funding education. One, you start with student standards. What is it that we want children to learn? What are our expectations for them? How much do we expect them to know? And we have that because we have state standards. So we know how much math, how much history, how much science the kids are supposed to learn. The second principle is adequacy. So then, do you actually take the money and fund the costs of how much learning you expect of the kids? And then the third principle is equity. Are we taking money and spending it in a way that actually makes sense, and spending it in a way that actually meets children's needs? And different kids have different needs. I'm a mom. I have 3 daughters, and there's a big difference between equal and equitable, right? And so equal is they all get purple sneakers on March 8th in a size 7. Equitable is the kids each get the shoes that they need for the activities that they're involved in, for the age that's appropriate for them, and based on the last time they got shoes. And we really need to be thinking about that when it comes to school funding. Money does matter to education, and one of the handouts that is available to you is extensive citations for the ways in which money has an impact. We have been spending, in some cases, additional funding over the years, and people wonder why performance hasn't improved. It has in a lot of places. It's the poor districts where we're not spending the money and that don't have the tax base that are really struggling. So that's an issue as well. But there is a way to do something about this. We have a legislature that makes decisions. Education Voters, the Campaign for Fair Education Funding, have put together a proposal that actually says it's really time for the legislature to take a more comprehensive approach and a long-term approach, come up with a funding formula so that communities have stability, so that there's shared responsibility between the state and local communities, that we use accurate data, that we base it on our expectations for student learning. And so what we're really going to need to be moving towards here is a legislature that feels more accountable, not just for pleasing people in the instant, but for really actually deciding that we have to have good and effective public policy that allows communities to develop, that allows our children, people to be able to count on the fact that their children will be educated, and that school boards and communities are able to plan for their schools and have a fair distribution for taxpayers. So what we have and what we're asking you to take a look at is some of the materials. We'll actually talk a little bit about what this coalition is proposing to do. We have this coalition which includes the business community, faith organizations, child advocacy organizations, and multiple communities working together to tell the legislature that it's really time for them to step up. And the people that they're going to listen to the most when it comes to that, we talk to them all the time, but the people that they need to really hear from is you. So we're going to ask you to get involved and make a difference, but I'll stop there for today. But I just wanted to say that for all these problems, there is actually one solution.
Thank you, Susan.
So we're going to ask you now if you would give the Mike and Tom any questions that you might want the panelists to discuss with us this evening. And while we're doing that, I'm going to prompt the first question to our panelists. If you could have a one-on-one with either Governor Wolf or Secretary Rivera, who's our Pennsylvania Secretary of Education, what would you want to say or discuss? Any panelist is happy to answer. Russ Giordano.
All right, I'll take a stab at it. Is this working now? Okay.
Yes.
Well, number one, being at the PSBA seminar last Sunday and hearing from Secretary Rivera, what a breath of fresh air to have someone who's actually an educator in that job and not some political appointee. So, I actually want to talk to him. And I think what I would ask the governor and him to do is to spend a certain amount of time in the field at a couple of school districts of their choice and do this thing we used to call in HR and when I worked in business a walk a mile. Spend a little time with the superintendent of a very large urban district and maybe a smaller rural district and a suburban district. Spend some time with the business manager. Spend some time with the board president and just listen to the things that they struggle with and then tell me what you believe is the state's role in helping with those challenges.
Thank you, Russ. Anyone else? Mr. Snizek?
I think what I would like to convey is that what you heard tonight from urban, suburban, rural schools here in the Lehigh Valley is basically the same issues. And we really need to focus on what's been described as a fair, equitable, and sustainable funding formula for schools, and one that's predictable. Let's face it, we're all building a budget right now, and none of us have any idea what the Commonwealth funding is going to be. And in all likelihood, we will pass our budgets without knowing what the Commonwealth funding will be. And that can't persist, okay? It leaves too much air for chance here, and it forces everyone to budget conservatively, and in essence, it imposes a greater tax burden on the local taxpayer. And we have to be able to commit to establishing a Commonwealth budget in a timely manner that has resources for education.
Thank you. Anyone else before I ask the next question? Okay. We have a question from the audience. With a brief response, could you all answer why the state legislature brags that they are spending an all-time high on public education? Okay.
Stacy will tell you.
Stacy, please.
I'll take that one. Interestingly, if you include the cost of the state share of pensions in the calculation, as I said, they indicate that their cost of basic education funding is increased because they've combined various line items into one, so that it appears that there is more money coming for basic programs, when in reality it has been flatlined. When you include the amount of money that they are including for the property tax rebate that is passed along using the gaming funds, that is a pass-through that the school districts distribute on their tax bill, yet it appears to be a revenue line item as state subsidy. It is not available for education, not a nickel of it is retained by the school district, yet it inflates our subsidy on a state proration. Additionally, you look at the PSERS reimbursement that goes into there. In our case, that's over $12 million. That's a state subsidy that really is not instructional dollars that is available for us to implement programs for students.
Thank you. Anyone else want to address that? Dr. Mayo?
Just a quick observation. This governor has chosen to separate that from the education budget, and perhaps for that very same reason. In other words, the retirement package is now separated from education budget at the state level. I don't know if he has the authority to do that and finalize it, but that's the way he's proposed his budget.
Mr. Snizak?
I just want to follow up on that too with Russ. Also, but in this governor's proposal is some bundling in basic ed funding that's inclusive of accountability block grant funds, educational assistance programs funds, charter school reimbursement funds, and additional DEF restoration funds. So there is some bundling and commingling of funds, which lacks transparency for everyone. And they should be individual line items in the budget so everybody can see what it is.
Our next question has to do with percentages. If each of you could possibly offer this answer for each of the school districts you represent. If there is no formula, how are schools funded and what percentage comes from state versus federal as opposed to property taxes? Russ? Mayo?
I can tell you with us, it's about 56% of our budget comes from the state, about 35% comes from local taxpayer. What was the second part of that, Roberta?
How are schools funded? What percentage comes from state, federal, as opposed to property?
Okay, well, we're 56% roughly state, 36% local, and Jack, the rest of it, what's that, about 11, 10?
About 10% federal.
10% federal.
But we're drastically different. With the local revenue, we're only about 35%, and the next closest district to us in Lehigh Valley is about 70%, on up, as Salisbury mentioned, 80% of the local revenue comes from local taxes.
For Bethlehem, we are about 26% state funding, 71% local funding, and just around 2% for federal funding.
And I'll reiterate, as I had in my slide, Salisbury is 80% local, 18% state, and again, that 18% includes apartment buildings, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. It's 80% local and 18% state, and it was 0.8% federal.
So,
And that went for a long time.
Susan is next, and then Mr. Snizak. Rich, you can go. Okay, Mr. Snizak can go.
Parkland School District's 84% locally driven for revenue, and 15% from the state, and about 1% from the feds.
So I think that one of the things that's worth understanding is that Pennsylvania actually hasn't had a funding formula since 1991. We took a little bit of a bite at trying to get one about 8 years ago. But the thing that happened is that in 1991 we had a funding formula up until that point. This is how our schools funded. And so what happened is then the legislature stopped moving forward with the formula and then started moving forward with the following. Everybody got something based on what they got last year. So, you know, if the increase was 2% or 4% for that year, then that's what everyone got. And then we got a set of cuts. Now, there's a couple problems with that. One of which is that anything that was unfair at the time was permanently entrenched, and reality changed. Some districts grew, some districts shrunk, some districts got older, some districts got poorer. So as reality changed, the funding got farther and farther askew. And then the other thing is that, you know, this notion of how we give out the funding, and this is one of the reasons that a lot of us are working really hard on a funding formula, is that we, you know, the goal for legislators is to come home and say that they delivered for their district. And the easiest way to do that is to say we got the same percentage as everybody else. And one of the things I will tell you is that there are a lot of public policy decisions that are often driven by like a fourth grade notion of fair. Like, you're like, that's not fair. That other person got more of an increase than we did, even though their district grew, or their district shrunk, or their district got poorer. So they make decisions in this way, and that has actually been really contributing part of the problem. Instead of having a set of drivers that are adopted that follow these rational principles that districts face. And so the other thing is that, and you know, people can relate to pay. If you've got one person making $50,000 and one person making $60,000, and they both have the same job, and everyone gets a 5% increase, then the person making $60,000, right, gets actually more cash, right? Now, the person making a lesser amount might say, well, wait a second, why don't you just turn that around so that you can actually start fixing the equity? And then the other person says, well, I got a lower percentage than that other person. So this is really, you know, we have a psychology issue as well, you know, but this is what one of the things that we face as we try to fix these issues. When they're trying to figure it out each year, they're going to come up with something that allows everyone to go home and point out to the spreadsheet, instead of a system that actually really works and tackles a multitude of issues by using a set of adopted drivers.
Thank you. Dr. Ward.
I would be happy with roughly 25% state funding for our district if I only had to pay attention to 25% of the emails and mandates that come down from the
I'll move on to the next question, which I'm going to try and combine a theme here. Since teacher unions donated $1.5 million to Governor Wolf's campaign, how do you feel whether or not they're vested in helping us solve the PSERS deficit? And in current funding, is there a correlation in trying to weaken the teachers' unions by cutting salaries? Or how would you recommend to any other school board how to balance pushing the state for more help with the PSERS crisis, and at the same time ensuring your staff and administrators that you are sensitive to their pension concerns? So anyone willing to tackle a multitude of pension and PSERS questions? I need a panelist to step up.
Will I dare ask you to repeat that?
Okay, so there's a lot of questions. So how do we ask the state to balance our help with the PSERS crisis, and at the same time ensuring staff and administrators that we are sensitive to the pension concerns? And do you think that when there is a discussion about PSERS, there's a correlation between cutting salaries and weakening the teachers' union because we're discussing their pension? Dr. Mayo?
One state, a couple of states, at least I'm familiar with New York, basically tried to resolve it by setting up tiers, and the tiers affected the incoming people and not the current people. That still doesn't truly solve the problem, but in the long term, it would solve some of the problem. But you're asking to balance two. You've got the non-stoppable object hitting the non-movable object here, and the only compromise is to probably affect the new folks coming in or those very early in the plan, and that, I think, has been discussed too. But it's a pretty difficult thing to try to resolve, of course, legally and otherwise.
Well, Mr. Giordano, did you want to attempt an answer?
All right. We all know that the state constitution requires the state to live up to its pension obligations. And I don't know if there's a lot of energy around school board members to try to change that. I think that the state just needs to figure out how to meet, how they caused this problem. Okay, that's, as a school board member, that's what is in my head. They caused it. Back in 2001, they changed the multiplier. They gave themselves in the state legislature a 50% increase in benefit, which translated to a 25% increase in benefit for teachers, which most of the state doesn't realize, that the state legislators got 50% increase in their multiplier, and the teachers got 25. The teachers kept paying what they were supposed to pay. The school boards, mine included, were only too happy in 2001, 2002 to be only having to contribute, what we were told to contribute, which we did. They made the mess. Now, they need to figure out how to make it better. And that means they might have to contribute more than 50% to the problem. So I don't really have a whole lot of answers or suggestions beyond the state stepping up and figuring out how to turn natural gas into teachers' contributions. I mean, they have to figure it out. And going forward, if they want a different plan for new people, that's kind of up to them. But I don't see how it's a school board's role, one way or another, to try to solve the state teachers' problem.
Mr. Sisler?
I think the governor is making a good attempt to try and soften the blow of the pension system. It's a revenue problem, and revenue was lost into the system by failing to make contributions over a period of time, and plus you had the recession that took revenue out of the system as well. The only cure to make the system solvent is to put revenue back into the system, okay? Whether it comes in the form of tax on Marcellus Shale or a pension bond fund, they're going to have to inject revenue in the system to make it solvent. That's the only solution.
Susan?
I think part of the question was whether or not, I think Governor Wolf has actually so far been showing himself to be a pretty tough and bold cookie. And, he's been working across the aisle with a lot of ideas that have been put forth by people from the party that he's not from. I think that he's been talking about tackling some really tough issues, and I think he's looking at putting together a package of things to try and solve a number of problems. So I actually think that, I think what he's talking about, not everyone's going to like it, but I think that there's a lot of great leap forwards there that if people can agree to compromise and not if people don't have to dig in and say, well, I have to get my way, and really the only people who have to compromise are the other guy. I think that that's going to take us forward. We do benefit from, or not we do benefit, the problem has come, districts have benefited from not having to make payments and the state didn't make payments, and so now we have to pay the piper. But this is actually all an issue of adequacy, right? You can discuss whether or not the pensions are what they should be, and I think some people think they are and some people think that they aren't, but the pension obligation is the thing that everyone gets stirred up about. But we have to have, we have to have teachers, we have to have a compensation package, whatever that looks like, and then we have to honor the obligation. So really, at some point, what you can't do is not pay for it and then keep kicking it down the road, to use an overused expression. And I actually want to echo that, we have a revenue issue. What we really need to do is say, we're going to actually get the revenue that is needed to pay for the obligations that we have. And if we do that, I think quality of life gets better across the Commonwealth.
Thank you. The next question is, what differences do you anticipate between the Campaign for Fair Education funding and the Basic Ed Funding Formula Commission, which the state legislature needs to come out with their report by this June? What differences do you anticipate between what the campaign hopes to get and what the commission will tell us? Dr. Rohr?
I think there will be some similarities. I think we're going to see attention paid to poverty, to English language learners, to migrant students, to homeless students, to have some of that weight, some issues for, I think there's going to be a lot of similarities. I think maybe the differences are what realistically is called for to pay for those things. And we can expect less from the state commission.
Mr. Giordano?
On Sunday at the PSBA conference, the advocacy conference, Senator Smucker who's the chair of the Senate Education Committee, spent a lot of time with us, about 90 minutes, I think. And he did emphasize the kinds of things that Dr. Rowe was just talking about and that I know are part of the Fair Funding Formula Commission's emphasis. What was a little disturbing to me as I think about what he said is that he truly believes that the state is supplying about 40% of school district budgets. That their budgets are 40% school funded by the state. So, you know, I think for most districts in the state, that is just not true. So if he's operating from that basis, then I don't know, unless somebody dissuades him of that, I don't know then really how much we can expect what comes out of that commission to reflect what is going into the legislature from the commission. So I don't know. But I know that there is definitely energy from what I heard and what I've read around the kinds of things that poverty causes in terms of school district needs. And I think we'll have some movement on that.
So the campaign for fair education funding, one of the things we've been working to do is actually affect the debate around this issue and make sure that there's a lot more information out to people in communities, to taxpayers, and to legislators. I think there are a lot of people who've been working really hard and earnestly on the commission. I'll identify a couple of issues. One, the pressure is on for them. Somebody lost their job last fall over education issues, and that doesn't happen. Education has really not been a third rail in terms of election issues. So there is a lot of desire to fix this, both for the very real reasons that people understand it's a problem and because that they understand that there's some public demand around it. I'll tell you what I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is that you could get a funding formula and you could not adequately fund it. And then what you would have is a very fair system and everyone would be treated unfairly equally, right? And so, you know, we really have to look at that because I think that there are going to be some people who are perfectly happy to put a package together that says, there, it's fair, I'm done. And so we need to make sure that we're really actually putting the pressure on for them to fix it, to actually give our kids what they need and to make sure that our communities are able to grapple with this, are able to have a predictable, adequate, sustainable system that makes sense so that we can stop having people feel frustrated with their school boards who are just trying to do their job. So we can have people feel like they can live in the community that they want to live in instead of feeling like they have to move across a river or a creek line because that's where a boundary is drawn. So if you're going to wonder what's going to happen and you want to know what your politicians need to hear, they need both, right? Adequate and equitable. And all of us have to carry that message to them.
Thank you. I'll move on to something that could be either or. Pick 2 items from a wish list that the state would agree to help with. And your 4 choices would be basic ed funding, PSERS funding, charter school formula, mandate relief. Pick 2 items from a wish list that the state would agree to help with. Dr. Roy.
Our most immediate would be PSERS and charter school funding. Stacy, you better have the same answer.
I was going to say basic ed and charter schools.
Thank you. Mr. Snizak?
Basic ed and special ed.
Thank you. That wasn't a choice.
That's my choice.
Okay, he's off grid. Thank you. I'm doing such a bang-up job as moderator here by letting you do that. Mr. Giordano?
I think for our district, it would be PSERS and charter schools. We don't have that many charter school students. It still represents $1 million, and in a district our size, that means something.
Dr. Mayo?
Basic education funding in charter schools.
Ms. Gabreski?
So my choice would be that they actually match the means of funding to the delivery of services, right? And so that takes on the charter school issue, it takes on the special education issue, it takes on the mandate relief actually. And somebody here talked about the cost of choice earlier, and you can be, for or against charter schools, but what we really want is to say, listen, if you choose to have a system that does that, and you need to choose to have a system of funding that aligns to that.
Thank you. A new question. Do you feel the proposed cap for charter school payments is enough fair funding effort?
There is an account. Are you talking about the CIDR, the proposed reform to the cyber charter?
Is that, can I get a qualification? I would, yeah, I would say that we'll qualify that by the cyber charter school cap proposal.
You want to say it all together?
Do you feel the proposed cap for cyber charter school payments is enough for enough fair funding effort?
In our case, we have far more brick and mortar students than we do cyber students. That proposal to cut it in half and cap it at $5,000 and change, while we would welcome it, would save us about $900,000 of our $21 million in charter expense. There needs to be a resolve to many of the other issues that are problematic within that funding formula, including the pension double dip and some of the other items that are clearly not functional in the current status of charter schools as they are funded today.
Thank you. Anyone else want to respond? Susan?
Yeah, I mean, if the question is really about, is it a good cyber charter funding reform, then the question is, it's a really good step forward. It does actually start to tackle a problem in a significant and meaningful way, and in a way that probably can actually be adopted, which is also important, right? You can have the best ideas in the world, and if you can't pass them. However, I think the thing, and just, I'm not sure how many like regular people there are in the audience. I try to come at this from the regular person. It's really important to understand that districts don't get their money per capita, but charter schools do. So charter schools, essentially, that means that they get their money off the top. Right now, they are supposed to be public schools. They are the right thing for some people. This is not an anti or pro charter school statement from my perspective. But this goes back to making sure that the funding system matches up, because that actually puts an incredible pressure on the district. And it means that what's happening is that you're choosing kids. You're pitting groups of kids and groups of parents against each other when you do that.
Thank you. We're going to have a little fun with the next one. So, if you got $1 million more in additional revenue, how would you use it?
I'll go first on that one.
Oh, polite.
I don't have a school district budget.
Dr. Mayo?
We have a shortfall projected for next year of $11.5 million, so I guess we put it toward that.
The other Russ?
I think I would sit with our administration and ask them to come to the board with recommendations. It's their job to make those decisions and our job to give input and approve or disapprove. And I'm sure that they would come with some forward. But we want to do more with world languages, for instance. So my guess is that if Randy got $1 million check, he and the administration would come back to us with something around a very new approach to world languages, because that's the next thing on our hit parade.
Mr. Snizak?
We have a $1.19 million deficit as we sit here today, so I would use it to lessen the deficit.
Bethlehem Area School District?
The practical answer is that we are plugging a wish of $1.5 million in state subsidy into our budget, and that would make me real happy to know that that was closer to being confirmed. But we also have a very long list of things that we have already reduced from our budget, and I'm sure that we would have an awful lot of debate internally as to whether we can restore any of those things that we've looked to reduce, or if we simply look to shore up the state subsidy that's a question mark in our budget today, or look to help ease the burden for our local taxpayers.
Dr. Roy, do you want to add any? Okay, thank you. Good answers. We have a question, since we heard this evening that Allentown School District is getting more federal and state funding to make up for property tax. So how would you look at equitable funding? What would we be talking about in terms of equitable funding?
Well, one of the fundamentals of equitable funding is to have an assumption about what it costs to educate a student without any other consideration. So you have to have a baseline there. And then that's the formula, whichever formula emerges is hopefully going to consider a variety of things, children with English as a second language, special needs. There's a whole host. I mean, it's like the 1040 form with taxes, you know what I mean? You just kind of look at each of the conditions. I couldn't tell you the amount because I'm not sure what assumptions we would make. One of the hardest baselines to come up with is what does it cost to educate the average student in Allentown versus for the Harrisburg versus Pittsburgh versus, you know, wherever else. And you can see there'll be variations there, but somehow that has to be nailed down.
Thank you. We have one last question. What do you feel the primary reason is why parents choose to send their children to charter schools? Dr. Mayo again?
I think there's 4, and this is not a scientific study by any means, it's just observation and intuition in our case, and I can only speak for Allentown. We have 80% of our students leaving at the secondary level, middle and high school, going to charters. We have about 3,000, just around 3,000 students in charter schools. I think the appeal of charter school is the intimacy, as I call it, that is smaller class sizes, the school's smaller overall. I think every parent, guardian loves, you know, smallness, so you feel that you know everybody and everyone knows you, which is, from a public school point of view, particularly urban and large, is not economically feasible because small schools are very expensive. So the intimacy thing, smaller class size, smaller school, period. I think the safety, the perception of a lack of safety in certain public schools, that's certainly what we deal with in an urban setting. In the last couple of days, the articles haven't helped us in the newspaper from a safety point of view. And I think at least a third thing is exclusivity. There's something in us as human beings that just loves the idea that we're going to a special place that's different from where anybody else goes, and we can talk about how exclusive it is. The public schools aren't exclusive. No matter where you go, they're not exclusive because they exist everywhere, right? So if you can say I'm going to a charter, and I mean, I said this is not scientific, but I just know human behavior and things that appeal. I think that's at least 3 of the reasons.
Dr. Roy?
So I'd give similar but different reasons as well. In our district, the vast majority, first of all, I think it's important to note that if you think of publicly funded schools that that student residents of the Bethlehem Area School District attend, so it'd be charters and Bethlehem Area School District, 92% choose the Bethlehem Area School District. So I think we sometimes lose that in the story. So if there's choice, 92% are choosing to be with us, and the range of reasons I think are many. For us, the vast majority of charter students are elementary students. They come back to us in middle and high school. Because I think our high schools provide lots of opportunities and range of courses and activities and so forth that smaller charters can't. It's not for class size because we have at the elementary level smaller class size than the charters. It's not for performance overall because we know that the performances are similar. So I think that some of it is not wanting to attend the neighborhood school. I live in Bethlehem. I have a daughter who's going into kindergarten next year. I know neighbors who have kids going into kindergarten who won't go to the neighborhood school for their perceptions of that school. Some in my neighborhood, people are relatively well off. And I wonder, why are the taxpayers paying more to send the kids of these well-off families to a charter school? That makes no sense. Well, meanwhile, we're cutting programs for the kids who need it the most. So some of the choice is perceptions of the schools. Some of it is longer school day. Some of it is daycare. Some of it is transportation. We have lots of kids who would have to walk to their neighborhood school, but we pick them up and take them on a bus to the charter school because of where they live. Uniforms is a big part of it. Some people like uniforms. And some people, it's different academic programs that may be offered or purported to be offered. So I think it's a range of reasons that are not what that often we think about. We think sometimes, oh, it's all about academics. It's not all about academics, the choices that are made. It's not about smaller school sizes. So there's a range of reasons, I think, but I get really hung up on people that live in my neighborhood in nice big houses, where the taxpayers of Bethlehem are paying more for their kids to go to charter schools than to go down the street to the neighborhood school where my kid's going to go.
Mr. James Allen?
In terms of the specific answer to the question for Salisbury Township School District, it certainly can't be size of school. It certainly can't be class sizes. It certainly can't be curricular offerings. So who's to know? I think it's half of ours are cyber. If not, it might even be heavier on cyber. So there's a whole lot of reasons for that, and some of which, may be entirely legitimate. But we offer our own cyber academy, and we've done it for about 3 or 4 years now. And we've recaptured a lot of kids. But I think different sells. Charters are new, they're different, and then they have these interesting names. Somebody I know really well says, just put the word academy on it, and people will be drawn to it. And then there are some people that just have it. The charter school movement in this state began as, I think, probably a well-crafted experiment to attempt to do something different with kids who were simply struggling in the regular school system. And it has devolved into a series of special interests where anybody who wants to play school can do it. And so just look at the names of them. 7 Generations Charter School. What does that mean? Circle of Seasons. That's one of my favorites. What does that mean? And why I come at this from a politically incorrect position. I don't believe in publicly funded charter schools. I don't believe that the state taxpayers should be asked to fund multiple public school systems. That's just what I believe. I think public schools that don't work well and aren't functioning well need to be dealt with. But I don't think you deal with it by segregating the population into all kinds of special interests. Arts Academy. I rue the day that my school board just raised the white flag and approved that thing. Not that they're not doing a good job, it seems that they are. But it bothers me to death that half that school population is probably from Allentown, where every kid in the Allentown School District for the last how many years have had art, once every 2 weeks, and phys ed once every 2 weeks, but they can have art half a day every day. Why is that a good thing for society? Why is that something that the taxpayers of the Lehigh Valley should be paying for? It just doesn't make sense to me. So I think there's various and sundry reasons for it, but I can't imagine anybody in Salisbury Township having the temerity to look at me and say it has anything to do with class size, school size, attention that their kids get, or academic program or achievement. It just doesn't make sense.
Closing?
There's a Pew study actually that has actually looked at some of those questions for folks who are interested in it. Ed Voters is a sort of joke that everyone who is for charters thinks we're against them, and everyone who's against them thinks we're for them. There is, I think, a new and shiny element. I think it's also charter schools get their funding a year later, so especially in the past 2 years of the budget cuts, one of the things that's happening is that charter schools will actually have programs to offer that the regular school districts did not have. The other issue is that charter schools don't have to spend their special education dollars. They get special education dollars based on they get their special education dollars and they don't have to spend it on special education services. So there was actually a thing last year where, and it's available in the news, where there's a surplus of special education dollars that they're able to use for regular programming, which means that they can go out and then advertise, well, your local school district doesn't have all these things, but we do, right? So that has been one of the issues that has put a lot of pressure on school districts. And so school districts, again, are paying out at the higher rate based on the funding they had last year to the charter schools this year. And so that has actually been one of the things that's provided additional pressure on local school district budgets.
Thank you. Well, that brings us almost to the close this evening. I want to thank you for a great dialogue on school funding. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists and participants. We want to thank you for your interest in coming out this evening and spending some time with us on this very, very important topic. I hope you have learned a lot this evening and how funding issues impact our schools and what we can do with this information. As I said in my opening statement, it was our purpose tonight to inform, enlighten, and encourage engagement. Together, we can make a difference on how our policymakers address public education funding. Thank you again for joining us. Continue your participation. Every voice does make a difference. Have a safe trip home and good evening.